We grant the extension of time in respect of the finding of contempt in Leeds Crown Court and allow the appeal against that finding for the detailed reasons set out in the judgment, essentially because the process was flawed.
The Supreme Court's bombshell might have ended Starmer's reign, but it's cracked open a door no one in Britain can slam shut. A door to a full-blown constitutional crisis, the likes of which this country hasn't seen in generations. And as the nation holds its breath, one question hangs thick in the cold London air. Within hours of the ruling, Britain looked nothing like itself. Streets rammed with chants, police barricades rising round Westminster, the air buzzing with rage and confusion. London hadn't witnessed a night like this since the 2011 riots. Except this time, it wasn't about broken shopfronts or looted trainers. It was about power, law, and betrayal. The fall of Starmer had gone way past politics. It had become a national reckoning. Across social media, live streams from Parliament Square showed thousands waving upside-down Union Jacks, the old distress signal. Die-hard Labour loyalists shouted that the courts had staged a coup. Tories called it justice long overdue. Reform UK branded it the day democracy fought back. Nobody agreed on what it meant, but everyone knew. History was being written in real time. By morning, tension had crept right up to Buckingham Palace. King Charles, pale and knackered, reportedly cancelled all public engagements. Palace insiders whispered he'd called urgent sit-downs with top advisers and retired judges. For the first time since his coronation, the monarch's very role was being questioned, not by radicals but by ordinary Britons. Could he really stay silent while the government fell apart? Or was this the moment the Crown had to step in? Downing Street was locked down tight. Armed guards lined Whitehall shoulder to shoulder. The Union flag above number 10, once a proud symbol of authority, had been lowered without a word. Inside, Starmer's inner circle huddled for one final meeting. Leaked transcripts later printed by The Guardian painted a scene of chaos. Starmer, red-faced and raging, reportedly barked, "No court can overrule the will of the people. I'm not stepping down for a bunch of unelected judges." But the writing was already on the wall. Minutes later, the Cabinet Secretary informed him his authority was suspended, pending royal confirmation. Then came the leak that flipped everything on its head. A classified memo stamped top secret appeared on an encrypted site. It revealed Directive 7 wasn't crafted by Parliament at all, but by a private cluster of policy advisers linked to European think tanks. Signatures from non-elected consultants, meeting notes from Brussels, and a money trail leading straight back to Westminster. Overnight, Starmer's scandal mutated from political outrage to whispers of outright treason. The revelation hit like dynamite. By 9 a.m., the fury had shifted. Protesters no longer aimed their anger at the court, but at the government itself. Crowds thundered, "Who else knew?" Parliament went into lockdown. Reporters swarmed the gates, hurling questions MPs refused to answer. One insider called it a living panic. Another whispered half the Labour front bench had already drafted resignation letters. Then, on live telly, Nigel Farage entered the fray. And he didn't mince his words. "This isn't just about Starmer," he blasted. "This is about an entire system built on lies. We've been ruled by Brussels puppets and cowards in robes, and now the mask is off." His fiery rant spread like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags like "Trike Judges Take Control" and "Royal Intervention" now dominated every social feed. The King's silence had become deafening. Crowds massed outside Buckingham Palace, demanding he restore order. Veteran royal reporters said the palace hadn't seen unrest like this since the abdication crisis of 1936. Except this time, it wasn't one man's scandal. It was an entire government collapsing before an outraged nation. Inside Parliament, Speaker Lindsay Hoy tried to convene an emergency session, but several MPs refused to show. Security services issued warnings of coordinated civil unrest. Armoured vehicles rolled through central London under cover of darkness. To the outside world, Britain looked calm, but inside, democracy itself was shaking. Then came the King's message, short, sharp, and icy. Delivered by the Lord Chamberlain, it read, "His Majesty recognises the decision of the Supreme Court as binding and expects the full cooperation of all government officials to ensure stability and public confidence in the rule of law." In one chilling sentence, Charles drew a line between monarchy and mutiny, between law and defiance, and for Keir Starmer it was the final blow, but the Prime Minister didn't go quietly. In a shocking late-night broadcast, Keir Starmer appeared live on national television, face pale, voice trembling with fury. He tore into the Supreme Court's ruling, calling it an unconstitutional coup. He accused the monarchy of backroom collusion and warned that dark forces were rewriting Britain's democracy behind closed doors. His final words sent shockwaves across the nation. "If I fall, the truth falls with me." Then the screen went black. Moments later, every major outlet reported that Starmer's communications had been seized under emergency powers. Within hours, Britain was almost unrecognisable. The streets filled with chants, police barricades rose round Westminster, and the air grew thick with fury and confusion. London hadn't seen scenes like this since the 2011 riots, only this time it wasn't about smashed windows or looted trainers. It was about power, law, and betrayal. The fall of Starmer had become more than a political crisis. It had morphed into a national reckoning. Across social media, live streams from Parliament Square showed crowds waving upside-down Union Jacks, Britain's signal of distress. Old-school Labour diehards yelled that the courts had staged a coup. Conservatives called it justice long overdue. Reform UK declared it the day democracy fought back. No one agreed on the meaning, but everyone knew they were witnessing history unfold. By dawn, tension had reached Buckingham Palace. King Charles, pale, drawn, visibly exhausted, reportedly cancelled all public appearances. Palace sources whispered that His Majesty had convened emergency meetings with senior advisers and retired judges. For the first time since his coronation, the monarch's own role was under fire, not from radicals, but from the British public. Could he stay silent while the government crumbled? Or was this the moment the Crown had to step in? Downing Street remained sealed off. Armed guards lined Whitehall shoulder to shoulder. The Union flag that once fluttered proudly above Number 10 hung at half-mast, lowered without a single announcement. Inside, Starmer's inner circle gathered for what would be their final meeting. Leaked transcripts, later printed by The Guardian, painted a picture of absolute chaos. Starmer, raging and defiant, reportedly shouted, "No court can silence the will of the people. I won't step down for a bunch of unelected judges." But the damage was done. Within minutes, the Cabinet Secretary informed him that his authority had been suspended pending royal confirmation. Then came the leak that changed everything. A classified memo, stamped top secret, surfaced on an encrypted site. It revealed that Directive 7 hadn't been drafted by Parliament at all, but by a private network of policy advisers tied to European think tanks. It listed meetings in Brussels, signatures from unelected consultants, and hidden funding trails leading straight into Westminster. Overnight, the scandal exploded from political outrage to whispers of outright treason. The revelation hit like dynamite. By 9 a.m, the fury on the streets shifted. Protesters turned their anger away from the courts and towards the government itself. Crowds screamed, "Who else knew?" Parliament went into lockdown. Reporters swarmed the gates, hammering MPs for answers, most of whom refused to say a word. One insider called it pure panic. Another whispered that half the Labour front bench had already written their resignation letters. Then, live on television, Nigel Farage appeared, and he didn't hold back. "This isn't just about Starmer," he roared. "It's about an entire system built on lies. We've been ruled by Brussels puppets and cowards in robes, and now the truth is out. His words, raw, furious, and perfectly timed, spread like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags like Darn Judges Take Control and Darn Royal Intervention Now dominated every social platform. The King's silence had become deafening. Crowds began massing outside Buckingham Palace, demanding that Charles step in and restore order. Veteran royal correspondents said the palace hadn't seen this kind of public unrest since the abdication crisis of 1936, only this time it wasn't one man's scandal. It was the collapse of an entire government, live before a furious nation. Inside Parliament, Speaker Lindsay Hoy attempted to summon an emergency session, but several MPs refused to attend. Security services warned of coordinated civil unrest. Armoured vehicles rolled through central London under cover of darkness. To outsiders, Britain looked calm, but inside, democracy itself was trembling. Then came the King's message, short, deliberate, and chillingly cold. Delivered by the Lord Chamberlain, it read, "His Majesty recognises the decision of the Supreme Court as binding, and expects the full cooperation of all government officials to ensure stability and public confidence in the rule of law." In a single sentence, Charles drew a line between monarchy and rebellion, between law and defiance. And for Keir Starmer, it marked the final curtain. For Starmer, it was the final blow. But the Prime Minister didn't go quietly. In a jaw-dropping late-night broadcast, he appeared live on national television, face pale, eyes hollow, voice shaking with fury. He branded the Supreme Court's ruling an unconstitutional coup. He accused the monarchy of secret collusion and warned that dark forces were rewriting British democracy behind closed doors. His final words rattled the nation to its core. "If I fall, the truth falls with me." Then the broadcast cut to black, silence. Moments later, every major outlet reported that Starmer's communications had been seized under emergency powers. The next morning, Britain barely recognised itself. The Supreme Court had moved decisively against the sitting Prime Minister. Keir Starmer, once the iron mask of authority, the man who promised stability, had been toppled. Not by the people, not by Parliament, but by the judges themselves. It all began quietly, then exploded inside the marble halls of Westminster. The ruling was read aloud just after dawn. Within minutes, news raced through the country like wildfire. The words were simple, but their weight was monumental. The Prime Minister's actions constitute a breach of constitutional duty. In that single line, Britain's balance of power shattered. Outside the court, chaos reigned. Supporters wept. Protesters roared. Phones lit up like sparks in the rain. Within hours, Downing Street was surrounded. The black door of number 10, Britain's symbol of authority, stood deathly still. Armed police took position. No one could believe what they were seeing. The man who vowed to defend democracy had just been accused of dismantling it. According to insiders, it all started with a secret directive, a hush-hush emergency order passed without Parliament's nod. Officially, it was meant to protect national stability, but inside government files, it carried another name, Directive 7. Directive 7 handed the Prime Minister sweeping powers to bypass judicial oversight in times of crisis. It was supposed to be temporary, but it became permanent. And when the court uncovered it, the fuse was lit. Within hours, senior judges convened an emergency session, something unseen since the 1970s. Rumours swirled that even the King had been briefed days earlier. He stayed silent, but palace insiders whispered that Charles was livid. He had reportedly warned Starmer weeks prior to step back, to respect the limits of his office. Starmer ignored him. Britain's top legal minds spent the night combing through leaked documents, emails, cabinet memos, signed orders bearing Starmer's own initials. Each one painted a picture of control, secrecy and fear, and by morning, The conclusion was inescapable. Britain's democracy had been breached from within. When the verdict was announced, there was no cheering, only silence. Heavy, final, like the sound of a door slamming on an era. Then came the shouting. The chants. "He's gone! He's gone!" echoed through the streets. Torn flags waved in the cold wind. By midday, Keir Starmer out-topped every platform in Britain, but not everyone was celebrating. Inside Labour HQ, panic erupted. Ministers locked their phones. Advisers vanished from their offices. Some legged it out the side exits as journalists stormed the gates. For years, Starmer had ruled his party with an iron grip. Now that grip was shattered, and no one knew who'd seize control of Downing Street next. Aides rushed to shred files. Black cars rolled out under police escort. In leaked Sky News audio, one staffer could be heard sobbing. "He told us it was legal. He said the courts would never touch him. But they did. They didn't just touch him, they took him down." As evening descended, Starmer's convoy was spotted leaving Westminster under heavy protection. No statement, no wave. Just tinted glass and blue lights slicing through the London fog. Moments later, a statement arrived from Buckingham Palace. His Majesty acknowledges the court's decision and has been briefed on the constitutional process to follow. 24 words that carried the weight of an empire. For some, it was justice. For others, a coup. But one thing was clear. Britain had stepped into uncharted waters. A nation divided, a government in ruins, and a monarchy standing on the edge of history. Political historians are already calling it the British Watergate. Reporters dubbed it the Night of the Judges, but for ordinary folks it felt far simpler and far darker. Trust had been shattered. The line between government and monarchy, between power and the law, had finally, fatally snapped. In Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham, protests kicked off before midnight. Some were shouting for fresh elections, others demanding the King step in until Parliament got its act together. Fireworks lit the skies, sirens blared through the streets, and for the first time in decades, UK politics felt like a full-blown storm no one could rein in. Was this the end of Keir Starmer, or just the beginning of something worse? Because even as he fell, whispers flew through Westminster like wildfire. Loyalists inside the Labour cabinet were already scheming. Some were said to be plotting revenge, planning to defy the court's ruling outright, calling it judicial overreach. Others hinted they'd challenge the very core of British democracy just to cling to their power. The Supreme Court's decision may have ended Starmer's reign, but it also cracked open a door that no one in Britain can now shut. A door leading straight into a constitutional crisis the country hasn't seen in generations, and as the nation holds its breath, one question echoes across the night. What happens when the law itself goes to war with power?